I hope you had a good lunch and that you found time to have some great conversations, and you're just about at the stage where you're finishing those conversations and sitting down and joining us. Excellent. Good. See? I knew they'd get it into order. Right. Thanks for coming back. Hope you enjoyed that lunch. Hope you managed to catch up with some people you've been looking for a wee while. And I hope you also managed to have a chat with our sponsors out there. You seem to have dispersed yourselves further around the room. Is that because the heating's out of control? You want more space? Or the person next to you impinging on your personal space? I don't know. Anyway, thanks this morning for some great questions via Slido. Also, thanks for some great catching, particularly over here, for the flying microphone. We want to do a bit more of that this afternoon, so plenty of interaction, plenty of challenging questions as we go forward for the rest of the programme. I'd say my role is to try to make sure that you leave knowing quite a lot more about what the issues surrounding the Heartland are. And we're going to kick off this afternoon with some pretty hard-hitting folk looking at fulfilling the wider ambition, and I suppose really getting stuck into some of the issues around, well, what does the market, what does business want out of this opportunity? We have got two very experienced people with us. We've got Kerrigan Proctor, who's Chief Executive of Legal & General Capital, and is, well, how many billions have you got invested in infrastructure at the moment? Many billions invested in infrastructure. He's going to talk to us a bit around what the market is expecting in terms of investing in infrastructure, and I suppose what he needs to be hearing as an investor. But first, let me introduce Sir Michael Lyons. Sir Michael is chair of the English Cities Fund and a strategic advisor to CBRE on public estate management, and of course led the well, not that recent, but the Lions Housing Commission into what we should be doing to solve our housing crisis. He was also chair of the BBC from 2007 to 2011, so I presume had nothing to do with the licence fee. For any of you who are of that sort of age who are concerned. So any questions about that, please. Thank you very much. So let me kick off and just ask both our speakers to give us 10 or 15 minutes on their take about how the wider ambition of this area should be fulfilled. Then we'll go to some questions. So, Sir Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Welcome all back. And I must say, I came along, as Kerrigan did, for the whole session this morning, and was very interested to see the progress that you're making. I've got a fairly narrow remit that I'm going to, let's just see let's get it up first. Yeah, that I've been asked to talk about, which is to say something about current trends in investment, to say something about what you have to do to attract investment into the Heartlands area. And this is a personal view, and I've flagged that up. I've been selective. I've taken out the things which I think might be most helpful to you as you think your way forward from where you are at the moment, from the planning to the actual operational, the bringing to life of the plans for the Heartlands area. It draws strongly on work that I've done both with English Cities Fund and CBRE. After 15 minutes, and if I haven't finished, I'll just actually cut it so as to keep it to time, okay? So the first thing to say is there's some things I'm not going to spend my time on, which sounds a perverse way of starting, but actually there are three big sharks, at least three big sharks in the water, and they all showed their colours a little bit throughout the morning. The first of them, the continuing debate about whether we need regional structures in this country or we don't. It would be very easy to talk about how painful it was to spend 3 years setting up the West Midlands regional structure, only to have it then subsequently demolished. But the lesson from it is do not invest all of your time in structures and superstructures and getting boundaries right and getting titles right. Get on with the job. And I think I see signs of exactly that here in the Heartlands partnership. Secondly, yes, local government finance is in a parlour state. There's no doubt about that. We are as far away from real devolution as we've ever been. You know that I've been a champion of a different form of local government finance, but explicitly recognises the burdens that come from central government and finances them fully and leaves money raised locally to be spent on local priorities. We're a million miles away from that at present, but I don't want to spend time grieving, because the truth is you have to get on from where you are. The same message again. The third one, of course, Brexit, who knows? But whether you take a sunny uplands view, that as soon as we're free, it's all going to be opportunity, or if you take the view that this is going to tip off a cliff, the one thing that is very clear is that Brexit will bring immense challenges of adjustment to this country. And what I know from my own career is that in those periods, local people turn to local leadership to help them make sense of the chaos. And therefore, the role of local government, local business leadership absolutely comes to the fore. And it seems to me, across the Heartlands area, you're laying down some important foundations. Now, investment trends. This is all based on work that, for the most part, that CBRE has done. And it starts by saying that the national and international uncertainties mean investors will be much more cautious into the future. No surprise there. Inward investment has been an extraordinary, strong story in recent years. UK attracting more than France and Germany put together, but real anxieties about whether that will continue if we leave the European community. Of course, there are those who say there'll be new investors. Well, we'll have to see. Third point, the weight of investment has moved away from London and is now looking for value propositions elsewhere in the UK. And the Heartlands is uniquely well positioned to take advantage of that, being the next phase on from London, and I'll say more about that relationship in a moment. Thirdly, interest in retail investment is still declining, but there is growing interest in imaginative solutions to the future of shopping centres. And that, again, might be part of the Heartlands, a component of the Heartlands strategy. Office space, still important to investors as an asset class, but distribution and logistics and other assets are increasingly attractive. Distribution and logistics, that's obvious. It's sheds, it's the digital revolution, it's the buy from home phenomenon. And of course, as we heard this morning already, Heartlands are very, very strongly placed in terms of that investment at present and presumably for the future. Amongst other assets, and this is the one I wanted to get to, increasing interest, and Kerrigan might say more about this from the L&G's leadership role in investing in build to rent. Much more institutional money coming into the building of homes to rent, and now with companies like Blackstone coming in to see even affordable and potentially social housing being assets that they might be able to build substantial portfolios of. So in terms of one of the big challenges you've got of housing the future, the prospects of more institutional help. So, and then finally, this point which is often repeated, there is no shortage of capital for investment, and people are very interested in long-term asset-backed investments, especially when they've got a good covenant, and particularly when they've got a public sector covenant. Now, what that, I don't have the time to develop it fully today, but what that brings onto the agenda is the scope for building a local housing and infrastructure fund of some size to serve the Heartlands area. Now, what do investors want? Specifically, there might be many different views on this. Well, of course, they want a profit. But actually, when they come to look at a project, very often, the things that they first focus on is, can they be confident that this project can be brought to fruition? And what are the prospects for a speedy return? Are they going to get themselves bogged down in something where you can't get outline planning permission for a long period of time, and the process of delivery is slowed down by development control step by step going on? For each of these issues, there is an opportunity for you to think through what you can do to improve confidence and to make sure that you focus on a speedy return of capital. They don't like to be lonely. No investor wants to be the first one in. Everybody prefers a position where they are sharing the risk with others. That might be with you as an investing body, or the individual council investing bodies, but it means that you have to focus on getting that initial tranche of investment in place. Then it's much more attractive to others. They will be attractive. Again, I'm interested to see whether Kerrigan touches on this. They will be attracted by a compelling picture of the future, a broad view of what you're trying to do here. Building, yes, on the important work you're doing on connections and transport infrastructure, but going much, much wider. And there's no getting away from it. Population growth is a strong indicator of opportunity for investors. So communities that set their hearts against any growth, any population growth, actually almost certainly, it may take a long time, consign themselves to becoming a bit of the past. What do they like in terms of what do investors want in terms of personal transactions with you? Well, they like consistency. That's why Manchester has done so very well. The same leader, the same chief executive for a 10-year period. Both of them talented, but actually more than anything else, it was the consistency of leadership which mattered. Open-handedness, that actually if a deal is struck, you stick to it. You don't come back time after time to see if you can do a little better because values have gone up. And then thirdly, realism. There's nothing that investors like less than meeting people who have completely unrealistic expectations of what you're going to do, whether it's with a city centre or a piece of land. Now, what can you do? Well, the first point, take the very broadest view of place shaping, your stewardship of your communities and this wider Heartlands area. So I've often described this there's a very strong focus today on the hardware, but actually it's just as important to focus on the software, including education and skills, and also the shareware. How communities, how robust they are, how inclusive they are all part of building an attractive proposition for the investor, because they all point to security of investment and future prospects for an even bigger return. Have a strong set of shared priorities, but also some flexibility so that you don't get, if trends change, if you can't move a particular area, you can't move a particular project, you don't get stuck on that one. You have some flexibility with investors coming along. You have the opportunity to take the flying bird, as they say. Establish machinery for speedy, confident decisions, but keep the clock face simple. What do I mean by that? No investor wants to be treated to a treatise on the relationship between the counties, the unitary authorities, and the LEPs. You know, it has to take place. The wiring all has to be in place, but nobody wants to spend their time actually having to work out what the relationships are. It's up to you to produce very clear ports of entry so that an investor coming to this area, attracted by the message that you're sending about the enhanced role of Heartlands, knows exactly where to go to for the first port of call and can be authoritatively pointed to a place where they will be helped. Ensure that your other functions are aligned. Well, I'm back to planning here. I'm back to planning, and I'm back to the planning of further education. Once you've established your priorities, make sure they're understood throughout all of your other functions. Far too frequently, strong leadership messages sent out from towns and cities and counties are not matched by a similar understanding in the planning department, even in all parts of transportation departments, and certainly very rarely in local colleges of further education, who sometimes seem completely oblivious that there are a set of priorities for the attraction of certain sectors or the enhancement of certain sectors, and go on doing what they've always done. Be willing to share the risks. I'm just going to use two case studies today, very briefly. One of them is the city of Salford. They have done an absolutely extraordinary job of consistent leadership for the improvement of that economy. We've been working with them since, that's the English Cities Fund, since 2003. And from the beginning, they've recognised that the way to create momentum was to actually play a part in the investment themselves. So they set up a fund to purchase land, which is then passed to English Cities Fund to develop, and they are then paid for it. And so it's a revolving fund, and it's been an extraordinary partnership. And as a result of that partnership, an area which was entirely surface car parking, the other side of Spinningfields, the car park for Manchester, as Manchester City rather smirkily used to refer to it, is now a major business district just coming to completion. Actively use your covenants and your access to capital to find, to underpin and offer partnership arrangements. CBRE have been doing some very interesting work with the Evergreen Fund and similar funds in Sheffield and Northern Ireland, and are now demonstrating that they can bring forward business rate income, rather modestly calculated, but at the rate that it offers up to a 30% return on the investment of the public money put at stake. That money is recycled in the short term. It's not all sunk in long-term projects, but it certainly points to some interesting experience about how even relatively modest amounts of money by the public authorities can be built upon and can actually provide that critical first phase, whether it's for infrastructure or whether it's for the entire project. Ensure commercial and domestic residents understand and support your investment strategy is my penultimate point. Several speakers made this point this morning. There is a danger in these sorts of debates that they become technocratic, that they're only engaged in by the politicos and the professionals, and that the population at large is left behind. Well, I would contend that the whole Brexit farrago that we're involved in is a result of populations being left behind. You simply have to engage and you have to demonstrate the potential value of what you're doing. So Salford now has a line in its budget showing the income coming back from business rates as a result of the investments it's made in recent years. Final point, avoid cargo cults. There will be, always there will be someone telling you that you can pin all your hopes on the Chinese coming to solve your problems. And this, of course, then paves the way for serious trips to China. Actually, this all may be useful, but actually your future lies here with yourselves, your population, and the companies you already have. And please don't fail to recognize the importance of intra-company investment patterns. Work with the companies who are here, because very often the short-term, the quick gains in terms of employment and security will come from them being strengthened and supported and winning further investment from their headquarters or existing investors. So really then I did want to just leave you with a few, as if I haven't given you any challenges, but I did want to leave you with a few that struck me as I read up for this contribution. Firstly, I wonder if you're yet really fully working out your relationship with London. Because actually, as I read your strategy, you talk about it as if it was another sub-region, sort of juxtaposed, quite important, but instead of actually really the real remaining growth centre in the UK. There used to be a time when in Birmingham or Liverpool or Manchester you could talk about a real alternative future with those cities restored to the sorts of strength that they enjoyed in the 19th century. I don't believe that's true anymore. This country now absolutely depends upon London's success, but London's future is inhibited by its congestion. And you are part of the answer to that. So your national role is tightly bound up with the future of London. And I wonder if you've given enough attention to it. You've got some really distinctive and extraordinary places within the Heartlands area, but I wonder if all of them have realistic growth plans. Are there still some of them nursing the belief that they can actually get by fending off development, doing as little as possible, into the future. Thirdly, you've also got some of the country's most precious knowledge assets. We're in one today. Do you know how to exploit them? Too much of the recent past, I think, we've seen our big universities becoming preoccupied with their global roles rather than actually concentrating on their national roles. And I fully expect the day to come when one of our big provincial universities says that it would be better off in Malaysia than it would be in the UK, as if you could separate a university paid for in every case by the public of this country, treated as if it was a movable asset. And are you really organised to make difficult choices? Far too frequently, the sorts of partnerships that the Heartlands represent get by making sure that everybody gets a little bit, and by compromises. I mean, it is the world we live in, but you know, actually that is a second best strategy. It's much clearer, much bigger an impact if you really understand the opportunities that you've got, the places that investors will come to, rather than saying, well, you know, actually we've got some really difficult issues out in the Far East. Let's try and push all our energy out there. Well, that's well-meaning, but actually there is an opportunity cost from that sort of approach. Finally, do you cherish good practice? You have here in the very centre of the Heartlands area, an authority which over the last 20 years has consistently outperformed most other authorities in terms of house building, and that's Milton Keynes. Now, okay, it was done on the foundations of the Development Corporation, but it's been subsequently great leadership in maintaining a situation of public support for ongoing development and land release, the two key requirements to build at scale. I've enjoyed today. I hope there's a few thoughts there that will be interesting to you. The most important message is your future is in your hands. You need to make some big decisions. You need to organise to attract investment. There is an abundance of experience to help you to do that. And you need to invest in your own future. Thank you for listening to me.
Michael, before you get one little thing, but just to clarify. So when you talk about the fully working out a relationship with London, but that comes back to identity for a region like this. And I suppose one of the challenges that the Heartland has is it, as you say, it needs to be associated with London, but it also needs to be distinct. I mean, how do you go about that? Because we constantly see the failure of you know, I suppose you could say the rivalry between Liverpool and Manchester in many ways holds back the development of that region. You know, what London has is this ability to be one big blob, which benefits from that. How does an area like this actually get that group identity from Swindon all the way to Cambridge and Oxford, Milton Keynes, etc.?
Well, certainly my understanding of what I've seen is that that's exactly the issue that you've identified, and you've established a separate brand of the Heartlands, embracing that whole area. You've been ambitious in the breadth of the area that is included. That will inevitably involve some tensions in terms of making it work. I'm not suggesting you become, you know, sort of an extent, all start taking on SW postcodes or anything. Not at all. And nor that you are labelled like all three of your airports are, London, but just that you need to sort out your relationship with London. You need actually to discuss and negotiate as partners what you're going to do in terms of building a stronger link with London, and actually you, in return, I think would expect some reciprocation.
Okay, an interesting challenge. So Michael, thank you very much. We're going to put lots of questions to you about all these issues in a moment, but first, let's get Kerrigan's view. Kerrigan, as I say, is Kerrigan Proctor, Chief Executive of Legal & General Capital. He's got assets in future cities, in housing and venture capital. So what is your take? How is the future of infrastructure investment looking for you?
Great, thank you, and thank you, Sir Michael. The question I've been asked is, what do we, Legal & General, look for when investing in real assets, so real estate and infrastructure? I think it's actually been said in many ways already today. I'd summarise it as a clear strategy with people empowered and committed to delivery. And from that perspective, I've been really encouraged by what I've seen today. Really has given me that enthusiasm and encouragement that that's what is coming together here in this EEH conference. What I'm going to do is talk a bit about where the money for investment comes from, because I think understanding that will help you understand the characteristics that we look for when investing. Then I'm going to talk about just some examples of our investments and some examples of our local partnerships. So if I can, first a brief description of Legal & General as an investor. We invest over £1,000 billion on behalf of our policyholders and clients, making us the world's 10th largest and the UK's largest investor. The point of saying that, of course, is that we represent a slice of private sector money available for investment in the UK. And much of that comes from pension savings. So, for example, we've promised a pension for life for over 1 million people in the UK, and we invest over £60 billion to back those promises, and a further £10 billion to make sure that we can say that it's a guarantee. What are the characteristics of that? Well, it's of course investing for a very long time when you're investing to back a pension, so between 5 years and 50 years, so it's definitely long term. And of course, it needs to be certain. Paying those pensions needs to be absolutely certain, and so we need a cash flow from those investments. All our pension policyholders are expecting a cash flow from us for certain every single month, so that's incredibly important. And then, of course, it's got to be economically sensible. We've promised, I hope, a decent pension, and that's, of course, what we need to deliver with any of our investments. Just to extend that a little bit, here's an example from a few weeks back of pension money. So Rolls-Royce have been investing money for their employees' pension, from their employees' pension contributions for decades indeed. And just over a month ago, they passed the responsibility for paying those pensions over to Legal & General, together with just over £5 billion, which we then need to invest. And just on the right-hand side, not specifically with that money, just some examples of the sorts of real assets that we're investing in that deliver that certainty and those cash flows. I'm going to start with housing. We've got a three-dimensional strategy in housing. The first is we deliver all types of housing by tenure. So that will be everything from homes to sell all through to homes to rent. So Michael mentioned build to rent. But in the rental part, we're also talking about affordable housing. So we will be using pension money to buy land, to build affordable houses, then operate those and rent those out and use that rent to pay pensions. Indeed, one of the recent schemes that we announced is an affordable housing and housing community project very close to Swindon. So that's the first dimension in housing. The second is we deliver all homes by life stage. So that's all the way from student accommodation, indeed, including University of Hertfordshire, just over the other campus in College Lane. We're invested in the new student accommodation there and their energy centre. So everything from student accommodation all the way through to later living communities as we face the ageing demographic and the longevity dividend that we'll get from that. And then the third dimension of freedom is all types by affordability. I talked about affordable housing already, affordable housing, key worker housing, all the way through to high-end homes. And I think that broad spectrum of housing is a really important and much needed investment in the UK, using pension fund money to do that. The other example I want to give is of digital infrastructure. The picture that you see up there is our data centre, KO data centre, just east of Harlow, not too far away from here indeed. And that's part of a broader picture of connectivity and the need for digital infrastructure, which I think of very simply as it's some data centres, some fibre, and then small cells or towers to transmit at the other end that will enable us to bring in all those use cases like 5G and autonomous vehicles. So that's digital infrastructure. And then the last one, of course, transport infrastructure. The big opportunity over the recent years has been the new rail franchises and lending for those expensive trains, so train rolling stock, including the East Anglia project and a few others. So those are just some examples of the sorts of real assets that we will be invested in. Here's a cartoon picture of a future city, so for our future cities business. And what we're interested in here is really helping future-proof. Heard Sir Michael talk about being interested in the future sustainability of regional economies. So this is really helping future-proof regional economies through our dedicated future cities business. And what we're interested in, I'm sure everyone's interested in, and in some ways it's quite easy. It's education, it's jobs, it's communities to live in, it's ease of connecting with others, so I mean both transportation and digital infrastructure, and it's got to be clean. So we're interested in both clean production and clean consumption of energy. The picture here is a cartoon, but we're either invested in or planning to invest in pretty much everything there. So right from the top left-hand side, you can see a picture of a factory. We've got a factory in Selby that makes houses, and indeed we're looking to do more of those. So right from the top left-hand corner all the way down to the right-hand side, the production of clean energy through onshore wind farms. We've got onshore wind farms, solar, offshore wind. So that and everything in between is something that we're keen to get involved with and already investing in. So we talked about future-proofing our infrastructure. I talked a bit about digital infrastructure and transportation already. A few questions came up about other infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure. We are keen. It's quite difficult to know how to invest. So our starting point is investing in a company, this one's called PodPoint, that's delivering electric vehicle charging points to our housing portfolio and indeed more broadly across the UK. It's a starting point. It's helping us understand where electric vehicle infrastructure might be going. It's certainly an area with some planning and clarity that we could invest in much further and would like to. I want to move on to talk about partnerships now. One that we were pleased to announce just a few weeks back was a partnership with Oxford University, where we've committed to fund and develop £4 billion of projects across Oxford and in fact Swindon too over the next 10 years. So this includes a science and innovation district supporting spin-outs from universities, jobs, and that great growth and that great knowledge that we have in science and technology here in the UK. It includes key worker housing and it includes student accommodation. What we really found in Oxford University were committed and empowered partners with a very long-term vision for investment that we shared. So we were delighted and are delighted to be working with them. Of course, there are other partnerships. So Michael talked passionately about the English Cities Fund in Salford and the incredible regeneration there, which we've had the pleasure of working with Muse, a local developer, and Homes England on. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the one in the middle. That's Cardiff City Centre. So just outside Cardiff Central, that full regeneration of what was, you can just see the train station at the end of Cardiff Central. Huge regeneration there, starting with the new BBC studios, other offices, HMRC, and moving on now to the transport interchange or bus station, I should probably more plainly say, and the new homes to rent, 320 homes to rent outside Cardiff Central. So that's the sort of thing with a long-term relationship with Cardiff City Council and a local developer, Right Acres. We've really managed to move forward that whole environment outside Cardiff Central. And the other example I've got there is with Newcastle University to develop out their science and technology centre called Newcastle Helix. So partnerships are incredibly important for us. And you can see we've got further examples on this page here, which really probably allows me to sum up the answer to the question, what do we look for when investing in infrastructure or real assets more broadly? We look for clarity, certainty, cash flow, and partnerships. So, thank you.
Right, we've got some time. Do come and join us, and we'll put some questions. I want to start with you, though, Kerrigan. I was talking to you earlier about. You both mentioned this whole idea of build to rent, and I do look at that model as being one which enables you as an investor to invest over 30 years to build a product which is maintainable and that gives you economic value, but also social value. Why is it so hard to deliver that kind of scheme? It does seem to have a huge amount of logic to it. Why is it so hard to deliver that kind of scheme?
I don't know that it is hard. It just depends on what your investment purpose is. So for us, and I laboured the point about explaining where the money comes from pensions, that they're looking for a pension every single month. And when you invest in rental housing or private sector or affordable, what you get is some rental income every single month that you can take to pay those pensions. The important difference is that I think answers your point around can we make it a socially inclusive use of that money, and can we care about our customers, who previously called tenants, customers in that accommodation? Well, of course we do, because we're building it to look to keep it. So we really care about the operational performance of it, hence the modular homes factory, because the operational performance is fantastic, and we really care about the heating costs, so we care about the environmental standards of it. Because we're keeping it for the long term, we of course do care what happens there. So I don't think it is that hard, actually.
But I suppose when we're looking, we have a housing crisis. I mean, so Michael, is it something to do with the fact that there is a backlash against this idea of the private sector making profit out of public assets?
Well, that's certainly part of the mix. I don't think you could pretend otherwise. The thing is that for the last 30 years, we have not replaced the role that local government housing used to provide. So if you look back 30, 40, 35 years ago, actually the housing supply is made up of house building for sale and then the public sector. Now, for a number of reasons, that disappeared. It's never been replaced at the same scale by the housing associations. What you see is people responding to the scale of the crisis now. L&G's one of them, Blackstone another, in part because they feel they want to do something, in part because they actually see that there is an attractive investment proposition here. But it's not a straightforward one. And so my review said more and more local authorities need to form partnerships because you've got the land, and that's the starting point. If you've got to go out and buy the land, actually it's a much riskier proposition to build houses.
Well, it is establishing that partnership, because I suppose what makes an investor invest, it's looking for a quality project, which is basically one which delivers them a return on their investment. And I suppose the partnership, the strength of that partnership enables you to have the trust in that local authority or whoever owns the land that you're actually going to deliver and not just run off with the money.
Well, I think that's right. It's back to that point about certainty and clarity, that if you're working with a local partner, it doesn't need to be in terms of investing the initial money. It can be in terms of sharing some of the upside from those investments. But knowing you've got local partners from all aspects, whether that's a local authority or city council or local developers, is I think a really critical part for that overall package.
So when you look here at the work that the Heartland's doing, what is it about the Heartland project? What could it do better to, I suppose, make that partnership work more effectively, to build that trust more effectively?
Well, I go back to the things that I focused on. We both mentioned the importance of confidence, and confidence is founded on the fact that the person sitting opposite the table has a realistic view of what can be done, at what price, and how long it's going to take. Some consistency over time, so you don't find that there's a change of control and there's a completely different view on the same project. Now, these are not, will not surprise anybody in this audience who've played any part in this, but it is a question of getting them right.
But I suppose one of the hard things, even an area like this, it has to contend with, is the short-term nature of political life. You've got a 30-year strategy, and you're dealing with politicians who've only got a 5-year lifespan. Is that a problem?
Well, again, I don't want to spend too much time talking about individual cases, but we can, between us, name 10 or 12 authorities that have managed to maintain a long-term plan, irrespective of changes in control, over that period. And that needs to be the model to follow.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, partnerships in Salford, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, Cardiff, Oxford now. There are plenty of examples of people who've understood what's needed. We've sat down with them and agreed very long-term projects. Okay. And the evidence says it is possible.
Questions for the floor? I've got this. Where's my micro? Where's my pinging thing? Here we go. I'm going to chuck this. I'll chuck this. You go in the middle, and I'll go over there.
Yes, of course.
Right, far away. And there's one in the middle here, over there. Just those two. Far away.
So I can understand the case for investment in housing for you. Seems much lower risk. But a lot of the discussions this morning obviously were about transport. And we know schemes like Nottingham Tram and Edinburgh and many others where there have been changes in political support and will and all those sort of things. What's your view of investing in public transport systems? Is it worthwhile for you, or are there only limited ones that you would actually invest in? This is for Kerrigan, obviously.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point back to the certainty of delivery. And so Michael talked about you need to have a very clearly defined timeline. So the development period, the construction risk needs to be very well understood up front to make sure that you can follow through that with that investment. And of course, the other point made, we like to work with other people. We like to make sure there's a sharing of those risks. So it's very, very unlikely we'd invest in one of those projects as the sole person, but a consortium of people with clarity, certainty, clear timelines. They can still be investable, although the hurdles are quite high, clearly, given some of the projects that you named.
There's a question on the slide that says, does realisation of the Heartlands transport strategy matter in terms of attracting wider property inward investment?
So, yes. I mean, very simply,
It's
yes,
a chicken and egg. It's a chicken and egg thing, is it?
Yes. Well, of course, there are huge projects, and you'll know many of them when we think about housing and the huge potential schemes, communities that have been talked about that may even be in planning already across EEH. Huge potential opportunities, but they're only really investable as housing projects if people can be connected to other people from those communities.
Can I put a but in there?
Yes.
Because you said it's a chicken or egg situation, and it is a classic chicken and egg situation. Actually, unless you're investing in the centres that you're connecting out, all the best connections in the world won't give you what you're after. So you need both. You need the connectivity, which you're focusing on and clearly focusing well on, but you also need the stewardship of the places that are being connected to make them worth investing in, worth going to live in, worth taking your company to.
So you need the people who are investing and the people who are developing both the housing and the transport to be talking to each other.
Absolutely.
While we're talking about Legal & General, it's another point in here. It says, does the Legal & General, I've lost the slide of things, does the Legal & General investment model take into account sustainability and low carbon?
Yes, absolutely. Just in terms of buildings, we follow the BREEAM method, so the Buildings Research Establishment Environmental Assessment method. Indeed, the University of Hertfordshire student accommodation is outstanding from that point of view. It's outstanding, excellent, I think, very good. I think the next levels. We generally we work with partners on these, so excellent or outstanding is what we normally aim for.
So if your partners are not up for that, then you're not in for that either.
Yeah.
Question, where are we? Who's got there you go, who's got the microphone? And then I'll come to whoever's got the black there. Yeah, far away, chat or shout, it will come on.
Is it working?
Yeah, it will.
It is. So Michael, you mentioned the high performance, as you put it, I think, of Milton Keynes in continuing to expand and to have more and more housing. And so there's a question to you, but it's also to Kerrigan. Do you think that the most efficient way to produce a lot of housing quite quickly is to go for the garden town, garden city option, basically huge greenfield sites, rather than to extend existing settlements? And if I could say, if you can consider the political aspect of that as well, I know I've mentioned this before, but overcoming the resistance, NIMBYism essentially, from existing local residents. Of course, there will be rather fewer of them in greenfield sites.
I feel there's an answer that's going to say it depends.
No. It's straightforwardly for me, you need to do all these things. Such is the scale of the housing deficit that you cannot do it all by greenfield development, and that would be egregious to focus on that unduly. I think the more intensive redevelopment of urban areas has a part to play in this. Certainly, garden villages and garden suburbs have a part to play in it. But you need to be doing all these things, and they will be some will be more appropriate in some areas than in others. You rightly put your finger on public resistance to development, and in my view, the roots of that we've far too frequently allowed development to take place, which actually disadvantages the people who are there to begin with, because we've stretched the existing infrastructure, whether it's roads or schools, and we need to get much better at finding the wherewithal to put the extra infrastructure in at the beginning, so that actually people find a benefit from the development rather than a loss.
Question here, as Michael says, what's the capacity of the English Cities Fund to partner the investment opportunities across this area?
Well, we're up for discussion. We've, due to our generous investors, the 3 investors, they've doubled the size of the fund on the basis of its performance. And so we are at this very moment looking for partners, ideally with schemes ready to go. But if you've got a good proposition, let's hear about it.
How much have you got, Kerrigan?
Well, look, let's be clear, we're not in the same scale as L&G, but I do believe, from the conversations with our investors, that actually we've got another 100 million to invest. We recycle all the time, so that actually we're on our way to 1.6 billion pounds worth of development value from a fund of 100 million. That's the way you do it. You keep recycling.
But if you can see an opportunity which is worth then putting another 50 million, then
we'd go back to our investors. I won't put him on the spot. He doesn't have to answer now.
Absolutely, and I think that's just the thing that we have in the UK. We have about 1.3 trillion pounds in UK pension fund, defined benefit pension fund money, and the trustees or the companies behind those plans would love to localise their assets. Pretty much every single one of them, as they mature in terms of pension plans, would love to invest in the sorts of projects.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the challenges that the UK has is that it's seen as not necessarily a particularly easy place to invest.
I don't know about. I mean, it comes with some of its challenge and some of its planning challenges and some timescales. But with the right partnership, you can make.
Okay, but compared to Canada, compared to Australia, it's not a particularly easy place for you to put your money.
No, I disagree. We're very happy as a UK investor, substantial UK investments, and they're working very well for our policy.
The man with the black microphone.
Given the launch last week of the government's Green Finance Strategy and the launch of the Green Finance Institute in the City of London, would L&G like to follow on through its obligation to report under the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosure with a commitment to invest in a municipal green bond for the entirety of this project?
So clearly, as you say, the Task Force for Financial Disclosure, that's something that we're committed to. We're committed to a range of sustainable investments. I talked about some of our onshore and offshore wind farms, our investment in developers of offshore and onshore wind farms and solar, and indeed some of the new technology that will make them better. In terms of green bonds, we are exploring precisely that now. It depends what the whole project is. So until I've seen the whole project, we need to know that it fits the criteria for green bonds. But we are looking at that now. John Cummins, who leads our Future Cities business, some of you have seen that, is working right now on making sure that we can launch one with the right investments behind it. I think with the whole sustainability agenda, when you're a large investor as we are, the thing we really want, it's very easy to make bold pronouncements. The question is, can you follow those through? And we want to make sure that we can follow them through.
Okay. We have a question here. We're right out of time, so make it quick.
Hi,
and good.
It's James Jamison, leader Central Bedfordshire, an area that's growing faster than Milton Keynes and has done for the last 5 years. First of all, can I have a request? Please, can you stop talking about houses? Can you talk about homes? A homes is a personal object, and it's very different and it's about community. Houses are just bricks and mortar. My main question is, we're talking about cities, and the whole Heartland England area, though it has some cities, is actually towns, and that's very different. And do you have a different approach, or are you very city-focused?
Kerrigan.
So thank you for the point on homes. I thoroughly agree, even though I may not have exhibited that in the course of talking, but homes certainly. It's a different prospect. So certainly towns. I mean, when it comes to towns, it normally is about the homes that we're delivering for those towns, whether that's for rent, for sale, affordable housing, later living communities, those sorts of things. Of course, when we talk about cities, they're the largest scale infrastructure opportunities. So I don't mean to say that towns and the investment that we make there wouldn't be important. It's less opportunity in terms of physical amount of capital involved that leads us to talk more about cities probably in a conversation like this.
Okay.
Well, the CBRE work actually is not limited to cities at all, and the model is applicable anywhere. So if you want a conversation about how we might help you to establish Housing and Infrastructure Fund, you clearly don't need much help since you're doing so well, but we'd be up for a conversation.
Right, we are bang out of time. So I just want to raise this one issue here, which I suppose it touched on something we talked about earlier about we're building. It says we're building houses, but I imagine they mean homes. We're building homes for today for the objectives of tomorrow. I believe what is meant is, do we really understand what the people we're actually building for tomorrow want from the infrastructure you're building? Are we doing enough work to consult the youth?
I mean, the statistics are compelling in terms of a broken contract with the young people of this country who've been brought up to expect that they might, if they found a job, if they went to university, if they went to college, if they found a job, they did an apprenticeship, they would be able to own their own homes. For most of them, that is just not in sight anymore, such as our failure as a nation to build enough homes. So I don't think it's difficult to know what people want, but do I believe that they've given up believing they're going to get it? Yes, I do.
So what does the Heartland do about that? Is there a solution that the Heartland can bring about?
Well, we're certainly exploring more homes for rent, and in particular homes for shared ownership. Shared ownership is I think, part of the solution that we're looking at. A lot of our affordable housing, around about 50% of that is in shared ownership. So I think that's part of the answer to explore.
Because I suppose it just comes back to this whole idea about creating better lives. I suppose it's very subjective. A better life for somebody who's over 60 will be very different from somebody who's 16. Kerrigan, Sir Michael, thank you very much. We're going to draw it to a close right there. Round of applause to our speakers.
Okay.